Okay, welcome. For those of you just getting signed in, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. So welcome to the session today, Overcoming Test Anxiety, presented to you by Tutor.com, a service of the Princeton Review. We're very excited to have everyone. And so just to kind of get started here, everyone's in listen-only mode, meaning that the best way for you to communicate with our team is to put questions into that question box on your control panel. We will address those at the end of the session. There'll be a whole Q&A, so please put any questions that you have in there throughout the presentation and then at the Q&A at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Lauren Lobdell. I lead the client services team at Tutor.com, a service of the Princeton Review. I am joined here today by my colleague who will be the presenter, Dr. Amy Dietzman, who manages our professional development and learning strategies team. She is an expert in all things around how to be a successful student because she has been a student a lot of her life. And so she's going to walk you through strategies to help you overcome some of the anxieties around tests, assessments, exams today. We're very excited to have this session as a part of our student success series that we host seasonally. So this is the third session in our 5-part series that we're running this winter. We do record every session so that any of you who signed up will get a follow-up copy of the recording in an email tomorrow, and we also post a lot of these on our YouTube channels. So if anybody needs the recording after the session, that will be available. Again, I'll be back at the end of the session to help moderate the Q&A, so keep those questions coming in the question box on your control panel. And without further ado, I'm going to pass to Dr. Amy Dietzman to take us through some strategies.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And I'm excited to talk to you today about test anxiety. I know that this is a thing that a lot of people struggle with. So I'm going to tell you some great ways to prepare for a test in the weeks leading up, strategies and steps that you can take on the actual test day, and then opportunities to examine what you could improve on your next test day. So we're going to focus on before, during, and after. You can take what I discussed today and apply it to a test that you take in any class, or a standardized high-stakes test that you might be taking, or even an online quiz you might be taking just from your kitchen. Excuse me. What is test anxiety? Well, test anxiety is a type of performance anxiety. So when there's pressure because of high expectations or if the stakes are high, people can become so anxious that they're hindered from doing their best. It is sometimes helpful and normal to have nervousness around testing. This energy can keep our brains alert and focused. However, there is a threshold, and sometimes too much anxiety can begin to impair our brain functioning. With test anxiety, feelings of worry and self-doubt can interfere with test-taking performance, and that's really what we want to address today. So it's okay to feel nervous, but if it affects your performance, then we may need to consider what we can do to combat it. So let's talk about the symptoms of test anxiety because they can range from mild to severe. It is possible to have mild symptoms of test anxiety and still perform well. Others can feel so overwhelmed that they encounter panic attacks before or during exams. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America describes symptoms of test anxiety as physical, cognitive, behavioral, and emotional. Obviously, the physical symptoms are those you feel in your body, like a racing heart, maybe you get nauseated. The cognitive and behavioral symptoms of test anxiety include negative self-talk, which we all probably do from time to time, avoidance, challenges with focus and concentration, as well as those racing thoughts that you might get during a test. And then there are the emotional symptoms, which could include things like low self-esteem and depression. There are many causes of test anxiety and include perfectionism, the fear of failure, stress because you didn't do well on a test before, maybe underlying anxiety, and unfounded fears. Think of that as you make up all these unrealistic scenarios in your brain and you freak out over essentially nothing. Anxiety in general is very common these days. It's extremely common in college students, higher than in other populations, but anxiety around test days can be even worse. If previous test experiences have been anxiety provoking or led to unexpected poor outcomes, then this can add more anxiety with each additional testing experience. This anxiety can contribute to you feeling like you haven't studied enough, and it can lead to a sense of dread around studying and testing. One thing we can do to combat our fears is to think about why we have the fear and come up with an answer to that fear. Either change our behavior or change our thinking. So for example, oftentimes we say things like, I'm not ready for this test, and that's pretty realistic. One possible answer to this is work on your time management, maybe perhaps your perfectionism. Maybe you think you're not ready because you want to be perfect. Another example is to say to yourself, if I fail this exam, I'm probably going to have to retake this test. And I'll probably have to retake this class. I'm going to fail the whole thing. This may or may not be true. And if you're not sure if it's true, but it's messing with your ability to think and study, then it's probably best to go to the source. Your instructor can probably tell you what you really need to pass the class, right? And you may not be able to retake the test, but maybe you can. And I do this for my students all the time. I can manipulate the online gradebook and tell them exactly where they stand given certain final exam grades or quiz grades. And so then I can tell them exactly what they need to get. In these examples, you're looking at your fear and you're addressing it by changing your behavior. As we go along today, I'm going to give you more examples of how you can change your thinking. So let's keep going. Now that we know the definition, we know the symptoms, we know the causes of test anxiety, we're going to talk about what you can do before a test to put yourself in the best possible situation. First of all, study efficiently. I know this seems obvious, but it bears repeating. It's not just study. It's not just study a lot. It's study efficiently. If you feel confident that you've prepped thoroughly, you'll feel more confident walking into the test. So learn how to study. While you may feel like you have this down, you can always get more tips on how to effectively study. And if you weren't in my study skills webinar, I talk a lot about studying. So you can review that one later if you want to. But here's a few tips. Give yourself plenty of time. Schedule out your study time. If it's a high stakes test or a big test, study for days, maybe even weeks before the test, not hours. Ask questions of your instructor. Ask what the most important concepts are. Ask about the types of questions on the test. Ask for a study guide. Gather as much information as you can. The worst feeling is to sit down for a test, open it up, and see essay questions when you didn't expect them. Or something like, there's a whole section on vocabulary, which is really easy to study, but you didn't do that because you didn't know it was going to be on the test. Create a study plan, which is more than just scheduling out time. A really efficient student will schedule time, and they will also schedule what they're going to do during that time. Are you going to make flashcards? Are you going to review your notes? What big ideas will you go over on which days? When you have big tests and a lot of stuff to review and study, focus on the big concepts and the details around them. I talked about this last week in our study skills webinar. Did your instructor spend a lot of time explaining something or assign a lot of additional readings on a specific topic? That's probably a good sign that it's really important. And then establish a routine. I'm going to eat dinner, grab a coffee, turn my phone off, I'll leave it in the other room, and go sit down on the balcony for some study time. I'm going to do this every night this week and then do it. So procrastination, I talk about it all the time because it's just a terrible thing. Procrastination leads to anxiety. If you procrastinate, you're avoiding. Avoidance is oftentimes worse than the actual activity because you're conjuring up scenarios in your mind that aren't even true. It's better to just start and tackle it. If it's midnight the night before a test, you're way too late to start studying, and you've also increased your anxiety tenfold because all week you've probably been getting more and more anxious, knowing that test is looming and knowing that you've done nothing to prepare for it. To avoid procrastinating, one good way to jump in is to take a practice test if it's available to you. Sometimes that just helps you to focus in on the studying and gives you a baseline instead of that overwhelming feeling of, oh my God, I have this big test. What should I do? Where do I start? And just as important as the actual content are actual test taking strategies. We're going to dig into those a little bit. Also, know when to cram. If it's a vocabulary quiz, if you can take the test, forget all about it, and move on to the next thing, then cramming can work. You just have to know when it's effective and when it's not. And really honestly, most of the time it's not effective. Cramming all night is never the answer either. And pulling an all-nighter can exacerbate your nerves. Having adequate rest, which is 9 or 10 hours a night, which is a lot, that's likely to be more beneficial than rereading your notes all night long. When you're tired, your problem-solving abilities are lower. Your brain works more slowly. We don't realize this, but when we're tired, our brain slows down. And this is not what you want to happen when you're taking a hard test. Sleep is directly related to academic performance. So establish a sleep routine for several days leading up to your test to get good rest. Set a bedtime and a wake-up time and be consistent with it so you're not jarring your body and trying to do something totally new the day before and the day of a test, which is what a lot of students do. They're like, well, I've been up all night all week, but tomorrow's the test, so I'm going to try to get some sleep. And they try to go to bed at 8 p.m. and your body's like, I'm not going to bed at 8 p.m. I haven't been doing that. So you want to establish that routine early. Eat a nutritious breakfast before the test and pack a snack for ongoing energy. This is another thing that students don't realize. Food fuels your brain, so being hungry is not ideal for a test time. Look for foods that offer steady stream of nutrients rather than a high sugar, eating a donut or something like that, because you're going to crash after you eat it. Sugary drinks are the same thing. They're going to cause that sugar rush and then crash. And you could crash right in the middle of the test, which would be bad. Caffeinated drinks or energy drinks can actually contribute to anxious feelings. They don't help us like we think they do. So let me give you a great example. He's not here, so I can talk about him. I have a son who has test anxiety really bad. He does every single thing I just said totally wrong. He procrastinates, then he tries to cram the night before a test. He pulls an all-nighter, drinking crazy levels of caffeine to keep going all night. Then he gets a nervous stomach on the day of a big test, so he skips food and just drinks more iced coffee. So he's taking a test with a sleepy brain, an unfueled brain, and too much caffeine, which is going to make him jittery and anxious. This is not only a recipe for a poor performance, but it's also a recipe for terrible test anxiety. So we're not just talking about doing well, but we're talking about avoiding the test anxiety. Feeling rushed will only amp up anxiety. So you want to get to your test early. Pack everything you need for the exam the night before if you have a morning test, and set your alarm so you can get out the door on time. One thing you don't want to do is rush because you're running late. Rushing only causes you to have more anxiety when you go to take the test. It's hard to turn adrenaline and anxiety down once it's gotten to a crazy high level. So you want to get to the test site a little early. You want to take a walk around the building to help relieve any anxiety that you do have. You want to move your body because that helps you remove some of that nervous energy and get your blood flowing, which will make you feel better. So then you want to find your seat, get out your pencil, turn off your phone, and get comfortable. So all of these things need to be done early. If you do get there early, you also have time to create a positive mindset. This is when you tell yourself, I could do this. Envisioning yourself acing the test and the way that you're going to feel when it's over. And remember, nerves are okay. They are a normal part of school and test taking. You can't possibly know everything. Remind yourself that you will not know all the material that could possibly appear on this test, but nobody else does either. Still, you can do your best to get some mileage out of what you do know. And one thing I do is I always tell myself that when I'm done, I'm going to go get my favorite coffee drink, or I'm going to go get my favorite sandwich, or I'm going to go hang out with my friend that night. Maybe I'm just going to go take a nap because I like to take naps. Something that makes me feel happy and like there's a light at the end of the tunnel when I finish this test. So that's something else you want to do before you start. Research strategies for the test you're going to take. For example, if you're taking the SAT, there are all kinds of strategies you can read about online, and I should tell you that Tutor.com is also part of the Princeton Review, and the Princeton Review is all about test prep. So you could take a look at their resources if you're taking one of those standardized tests like SAT, ACT, LSAT, GMAT, all of those. But what I really know a lot about are teacher-created tests. So multiple choice and essay question tests require different approaches. If it's a teacher exam and you know it's multiple choice, you want to research strategies for multiple choice exams. And then give yourself practice tests and use them not only to work on your test taking, but also to practice controlling your anxiety. If you're afraid of not being able to finish the exam in time, then you want to do timed practice tests. Even if you're just setting your own timer, you want to try to simulate what you will experience on the test day so you can employ all your strategies. Know what to expect. Like I said before, ask your instructor what the test is like. Instructors hate this question. Is this going to be on the test? But they don't mind questions like, what question types are on this test? How can I effectively study for this exam? Are there any particular concepts I should be focusing on? And if it's a standardized test, you can probably look up how much of the exam is focused on which concepts. So for example, if you know that only 2 questions on the whole test are going to be about business law, then you don't want to waste all of your time studying business law when 40 questions on the test are about taxes, right? You should be studying taxes, not business law. So that's another thing you should always do, is really make sure you know what this test entails. On the day of the test, another simple thing to do, but it's so important, is wear comfortable clothes. The last thing you need is to feel cold or like your pants are digging into your stomach. Wear what feels good and what makes you feel confident also. You want to feel confident too, so that's important. Probably like rolling out of bed in your pajamas and then going to take the test is not going to make you feel as confident, because half the battle is just feeling positive and confident about what you're doing. All right, so you prepared, you got dressed, you made it to the test, and it's time to begin. Now what do you do to calm your nerves? If possible, sit near the front. You may not be the type to sit in the front of the class on lecture days, and sometimes you can't move your seat, you have to sit where you have to sit. But on test days, it's better to sit in the front because you can avoid the distractions of everybody around you. If it's an online exam, go to a quiet place. Don't take an exam in the same room as your roommate watching TV, where your mom's cooking dinner, or people are having conversations, or in the middle of a coffee shop where you might be distracted by people. You want to be in a distraction-free zone. Don't wear a watch that vibrates. And if you have your phone in your bag, make sure it doesn't vibrate either. If you're allowed to listen to music, choose classical. It's the least distracting for your brain and it's calming. Don't worry about the person sitting next to you or in front of you who might be going through their test twice as fast as you, because you never know what strategies they're actually using. And if you are overly distracted, you could try to wear earplugs. Take your time. Read the directions thoroughly and read all answers before making a choice or starting the essay. There is nothing worse than putting time into a question and realizing that you're not solving for X, or the essay you've been writing is completely off target. Slowing down can also help you stay focused. Also expect some curveballs. Remind yourself, you are not expecting to get 100% on this exam. You're just expecting to pass it. Or maybe you just want an A, any kind of A or a B. Also, your sense of what questions should appear on the test is not going to match perfectly with what the writer of the test had in mind. Therefore, when you encounter a curveball, don't get upset and lose your concentration. Just make an intelligent guess now or mark that question and come back to it later. Just tell yourself up front, something's going to come up on this test and it's going to freak me out. I'm not going to know it. And then you'll be ready for it. Watch the clock and manage your time appropriately. Always be aware of where you are on the test, how far you have to go, and how much time you're spending on questions. And then also, how much time, obviously, do you have to complete this test? So the clock is important. I know a lot of people think it makes them more anxious and they start to freak out, but it's better to at least watch the clock than to only finish half the test and find out that your time's up. Have a test strategy before you even start. Are you going to skip questions when you don't know them? Are you going to start with the essay questions? Are you going to take a first pass and then check your answers? And how are you going to use scratch paper if you have it? Like, what's the scratch paper for? Most students prefer to carefully work through the questions once rather than rushing through the whole exam and leaving time at the end for checking. Nervous test takers, keep this in mind. Nervous test takers are especially prone to changing correct answers to incorrect answers when they go back through the second time. Be aware of that. Tell yourself that. If you go back and you start second guessing, stop. Just know that your first instincts were probably right. Unless you don't read the whole question or all of the answer choices. This is a very common mistake on tests that you want to avoid. So your first instincts are right unless you realize that you didn't read all the answer choices. So if you read A and B and you say to yourself, yep, it's B, and you mark it, you haven't read C or D. How do you actually know that B is the best? That's a big mistake you want to try to avoid. When you sit down for the test, you don't have to start with the first question and complete the whole test in order. Start with the ones you know. Don't waste your time trying to figure out that one question that has you stumped. Gather all the points you can from all the questions that you do know first. And then if time allows, then go back to the questions you skipped and try to answer them. And just make sure you're not stressing yourself out too much by jumping all over the place without a plan. That's where maybe your scratch paper can come in, because there you can organize your strategy. So again, have a strategy and stick to it, and don't try to come up with a strategy while you're in the middle of the test and jump all over the place, because that's going to stress you out even more. All right, if you continue to feel overly anxious, try this anxiety control exercise to reduce your tension. And this exercise is so easy, you might be skeptical, but it does work. If you feel your heart race, close your eyes. Breathe in slowly to the count of 7, and then exhale to the count of 7. Continue this slow breathing until you start to feel yourself relax. This is only going to take like 2 or 4 sequences. Then you're going to open your eyes, give yourself a positive self-talk. You're going to do well. You studied hard. You're doing the best you can. And this whole thing is only going to take you like a minute, but it is well worth the time. So don't be afraid to just put your pencil down for a second and take some breaths. Deep breathing can slow down a beating heart or a racing mind, so practice these also at home. The very act of concentrating on breathing and thinking about it can biometrically alter your anxious feelings. Now remember, nervousness isn't always bad, because nerves can actually be used to help you focus. So let's talk about what you do if you freeze. This was a question I got the last time I did this webinar. Do you struggle with freezing? So step 1 is to simply pause. Take a moment or two, focus on your mindfulness, take your deep breaths like I just said. If you're stuck on a particular question, simply skip it and move to something easier that you feel more confident about. If you're stuck on a particular, I already said that. You can always come back to a challenging question or prompt, and chances are that your memory will be jogged in some capacity from the rest of the exam. Blanking on an exam often has to do with assessments of our memorization. We're usually safer on analyzing or comprehension, so you want to skip to a different style of question, if that makes sense. The change in style or tone of a question might be enough just to snap you out of that frozen state. Feelings of fear and apprehension are not the problem. The real problem that students freeze is when they ask their memory to recall something and they haven't learned or filed it correctly. So the way most students file information is similar to like blindfolding a filing clerk and then asking that clerk to find an important file. So what you want to do is look over the rest of the test. Often you're going to see another question and it's going to jog your memory and you're going to go, oh yeah, you're going to look over the questions you have already answered, and it's just you're going to start to feel better. Sometimes the answer to one question is actually in the question of another one. So just seeing different keywords and topics may get you started again. Make sure you skip that question. If there is one particular question that has induced your brain freeze, then just skip it. A lot of the times the answer will spontaneously come to you later. Also, if you keep going, you might be able to finish the rest of the test okay, and you just missed one question. So that's what you do if you freeze. There was a lot there, but pause, breathe, think about if this is a memorization thing. If it is, find a different type of question, look over the rest of the test, see what's going to jog your memory. If all else fails, skip it. All right, before entering college or certain high school classes, you may have been a perfectionist. You might have gone into exams feeling that you studied everything you needed to know. You might be a perfectionist in your job. It can be emotionally difficult to let go of perfectionism, but you must try. In college, it is virtually impossible to learn every single thing. So you need to focus on the most important concepts and learn those well enough to be successful. Remind yourself that your understanding of the major concepts are going to help you guess on some of the details you don't remember during a test. You may be able to eliminate more of the wrong answers. You may be able to draw some conclusions based on what you do know. You may be able to connect one question that you did know to one you didn't know and make an educated guess. So what I'm saying here is that studying helps you all the way around. And remember, this is problem solving, and you can't do this well when you're exhausted. To help curb your perfectionism, try this. Know when you've done your best. Sometimes your best will be a C. Sometimes your best will be an A. Just know yourself and when you've tried your hardest without killing yourself. That goes along with setting realistic goals. Try a mission statement like, I want to achieve an 80% or better on all my tests, and I'm going to get an 85% or better on all my written work in this class. You may not get that specific, but know what you're asking of yourself and beware of undue pressure. And if you think a class is going to be one way and you discover a couple weeks in that it is way easier, or maybe it's way harder than you expected, then adjust your goals. All right, now we're to the after the test part. So you took the test, you're walking out, and if you're like me, you might be the type of person who overanalyzes every single thing. But you've already had a lot of anxiety leading up to this test, so the best thing you can do for yourself now is let it go. Don't give a test the power to define you. An exam won't tell you whether you're the most brilliant or the least brilliant student in your class. Your performance on an exam mostly depends on how effectively you studied for the test and the test-taking strategies that you used. So take yourself out, meet up with a friend, go for a walk, get an ice cream cone, take some deep breaths, and don't overanalyze. You'll get your results soon enough, and that's when you want to evaluate your performance. So on the day of the test, let it go. Later, a lot of students are over it. They look at the test and they say, whatever, it's over, nothing I can do now. But that is a terrible move for a student looking to improve test anxiety or testing strategies, or they want to improve their overall grades, because you need to evaluate what you did well and where you should have focused more. Revisit your notes and determine if you need a new note-taking strategy or if you need a new study strategy. Don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again, expecting different results. Take some time to evaluate your whole plan of attack and come up with a new plan. Here's some of my reference links. And before I take questions, I just want to plug next week's webinar, which is on collaboration and teamwork. And my colleague, Sarah Snyder, is going to be presenting this, and she's going to be talking about collaboration and teamwork when it comes to school, you know, those dreaded group work assignments you have to do, and how that's going to help you later when you go get a job, maybe in the job you already have, when you're applying for a job, how it helps you in your career, and all of that. Just going to tie together school and job performance when it comes to collaboration and teamwork. And it's a great one. We've never done this one before, so I hope you guys will join us. And now I'll take some questions.
And I will rejoin the conversation. Amy, awesome presentation. Thank you for walking us through your test anxiety strategies, though I think some of those strategies can help with a lot of other kinds of anxieties that may come up too. So thank you as always for that. Just as you guys start to populate some of your questions here in the question box, we'll go through them for a few minutes and have Amy address some of them. So go ahead and start putting those in there. I see a few coming in now, but feel free to put your question in. In the meantime, just want to call out up on the screen, you'll see a variety of our social media channels. We want to sort of just introduce for all of you that we have all of these webinar and events posted whenever we're hosting them on our social media channels. So if you want to stay current with what we're hosting next, and see and have access to those without having to hear from your school or your library or college or however you heard about this event today, the best way is to follow our social channels. And also, just for any of you who want to watch the recordings of any sessions we've hosted in the past, and also the recording of this session once it's posted over the next day or so, we have a YouTube channel, and we post all of our webinars of various topics, including student success topics that Amy has hosted in the past, but other topics too. So check out our YouTube channel. So without further ado, let me see what we got for questions, Amy. Okay. At the top of the list here, how do you deal with testing time constraints as an individual that processes information slowly?
Oh, great. That's a good one. So the first thing you want to do when you're, well, actually, the first thing you want to do is if you process things slowly and there's a possibility of getting extra time on the test, that's something you might want to talk to your instructor about. Depends on what the test is. I understand all of that, but getting extra time may be a possibility, and that could help you. Otherwise, what you want to do is you want to choose the questions first, if you can skip around, you want to choose the questions first that you know, the ones that are the fastest for you to finish. So if you can go through the test and finish up those ones that take a little less processing time, be aware of your time, be aware of how much time you're spending on each question. So that's something else. And then go back to the ones that really are, requiring more processing time for you, and then answer those. So try to get a little bit of momentum and then go back. That way you've also gained as many points as you can on the test before you got to the ones that started to slow you down a little bit. So you want to try that too. So like if there's a vocabulary section of the test, sometimes that's a quick one to start with, get those done. If there's like reading comprehension type questions, those might take longer. So you just kind of have to play around with your strategy a little bit and see like where do I get momentum and where can I finish as quickly as possible, and then what do I need to take more time on. Look at your clock. All right, I got 10 more questions. I'm a little slower here. I'm going to spend 2 minutes on each question, and I'm going to do my best.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Let's see what's next. Okay. I always have test anxiety since I was younger, but I'm wondering that I always study. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read this out loud as I look at the question. But when I go to take, okay, so this person has test anxiety since they were a kid, always studies a lot, but when they go to take the test, the mind goes blank. Do you have any strategies for how to overcome kind of like that anxiety that happens even though you've prepped and you know the material, you just freeze up in the moment?
So great question. Part of what that is memorization strategies. So remember what that slide said about oftentimes when we freeze, it's because we're trying to recall information that is in our memory somewhere. And sometimes that could be what's throwing you off. Maybe you are a great studier, but you are memorizing. And it's possible that you might do better if you try to deeply understand the material in a different way. So you're not trying to recall it from that file deep in your brain, but you're just remembering and talking about concepts and general understanding of things. So that could be it. I'm not going to say that's always it, but I do think that there's something to be said about people who try to memorize everything for a test. It really is ineffective. Nobody can remember everything. So you may think you have test anxiety or you're not great at test taking, and that really may not be it. It may be that you're not as good at studying as you think, and you need to study a little bit differently. So I would try that first. If I were you, I would try a different studying strategy. And I give a lot of studying and note-taking strategies in some of my other webinars. Maybe something I said there will connect for you. And try that and see if you can't have just a different understanding of the material. Also remembering that rule I said last time, whenever that last one was, when I talked about 80% of what's in your class and what you're studying and what your professor or your instructor is talking about is not even going to show up on a test. It's really only going to be over 20%. So maybe you're just clogging your brain up because you're studying and trying to memorize everything. And of course, your brain at some point is, going to freeze up and be like, I don't know, I don't remember that. So your studying strategy might need to change. I would start with that. And then my last thing is, if you do get into the test though, same old story, you're like, dang, I studied differently and here I am and I'm still freezing up and I don't know what's going on, is again, try to change look at different types of questions and look ahead at the test, see if you can answer another question that might jog your memory about the one before. Try things like that and see if that doesn't help.
One comment came in kind of related to this topic that I think is worth echoing is students should try to explain what they have learned to someone else out loud, like pull your significant other, family member, brother, sister, whatever you have kind of in your vicinity, and try to explain the concepts that you're studying to them so that you actually realize what you've gained mastery in versus not. So Amy, that's one tip that came along through the chat.
Really good.
Does that sound in line with your recommendations?
Absolutely, which is part of some of the note-taking strategies too. I mean, I've always said fake it till you make it. And when you talk to someone, when you talk through what you know, you're kind of faking it until you start to know it. But also that's the same thing with some of the note-taking strategies, is that you cover up part of your notes and then you talk about the parts that, the cues that you have in other parts of your notes and see what you actually know. If you can say everything out loud and explain it, then you know it. And that's one thing we forget to do, is often we just read our notes and we're like, yep, but there's no assessment there. There's no talking it out loud. There's no, what do I really know if I don't have this in front of me? And that's a step we need to remember.
Definitely. And also putting it into your own words too, right? Because when it's just sort of a transcription of what someone else said and you just read it, but then when you have to actually say it back and explain it to somebody else, it's a whole different story. So
that's right.
Awesome. Okay. I'm seeing a couple questions here that are sort of related, so I'm going to try to synthesize them here a little bit. But there's some questions about timed exams where you're under that clock and then also you can't go back. Do you have any strategies for those kinds of like intense, the clock is ticking and you sort of get locked out of questions types of exams?
So you can't skip and go back. Right. Okay. So the best strategy with those is still not to spend a considerable amount of time on one question if it's tripping you up. It's best to guess. Those are the ones where you want to guess. So you want to pay attention to your time. When you get to a question that's really stumping you, have a rule for it. You know, I'm not going to spend more than 3 minutes on the questions that are really hard, and guess and keep going. So you're giving yourself the best opportunity to get the ones right that you do know. So again, you never want to spend too much time on one question, leaving 10 others that you would have gotten right unanswered. And then you don't get those points. So same thing, keep going, moving, paying attention to the time, guess, get to the ones you do know, gather those points. That's really the best advice, because if you can't go back, then you can't go back. You know, what can you do?
Awesome. I'm trying to find the next question. So let's see here. So there's one that's a little specific, Amy, but I think this is a good one to think about your resources and, you know, who you have in your resource toolkit. So when needing practice tests for nursing coursework, do you have any recommendations on sites to use? It's obviously a tailored question, but just thinking about resources. Obviously, you may not be a nursing expert, but in general, what would you recommend when you sort of are tapping out on resources and you know, where else you could go to get that kind of subject matter expert help?
Tutoring is great. I'm always going to say tutoring, because at Tutor.com, we actually have nursing tutors who help students with nursing exams, so they can help you with the content. They're not going to be experts at strategies for taking those exams, but they are going to know the nursing content to help you study. So that's one option. Obviously, your instructor is always a really good resource, since we so often don't ask because we don't want to look stupid or they're intimidating or whatever, but it's always good too to ask your instructor, where can I find more materials to study for these exams? What sites do you recommend? And those kinds of things. Most of the time, they're going to have plenty of resources for you. So I would recommend that. What else do you think, Lauren? Do you have any other thoughts about that one?
Yeah, this is where I always like to give a plug for the library, because you know, whether you're a college student on this call today and you have a library on a campus or an online library, your librarians are some of the best people in the world for helping you to get access to resources and find, you know, electronic versions, good old-fashioned books and things like that. So use your libraries. Also, many of the people who are here may connect to Tutor.com or have heard about this because we work with so many public libraries. Your public libraries have arsenals of resources on the different disciplines out there. So I'm always a big advocate for leverage your libraries and your librarians.
That's great. Thank you so much for saying that.
Okay. We'll just take one or two more questions here. What study habits and strategies would you recommend for someone who's never really studied before and just learned mostly through memorization?
Yes. That's funny, because my son is a senior in high school, and he just informed me a couple weeks ago that he's never studied for a test. He just never has. He hasn't had to. It's just like, what? So all right, study strategies. If you haven't had to study and you focus on memorization, first of all, you know, good note taking, repeated exposure. So I always say you want to take notes, review your notes. That's two good things. But you also want to find other resources. So sometimes, you know, hearing it from an instructor or reading it in a textbook, that might click for you, but a lot of times you still need something else. So Googling and watching a YouTube video. I know videos speak a lot to the younger generation. That's always a really good way to find in a different way and see if that's clicking for you. Also, you want to make sure you're testing yourself in some way, assessing yourself in some way. So like I said, you know, you're just reading your notes. It's going to seem like, oh, I got this. I keep reading these notes. They're great. But what happens when you move the notes and now you have questions and you have to answer them? So are you going to make flashcards, online flashcards? There's all kinds of online tools you can use for that. Are you going to find practice quizzes that you can take, or practice tests? There's a lot of apps that have all kinds of practice questions and topics and things. And I haven't ever found that like just Googling a random topic, and some practice test is super helpful for me, but it depends on the subject. It really does, because there's a lot of subjects out there that you could just Google and find practice tests all over the place. So that's always helpful. So again, it's multiple modalities, trying different things, taking good notes, testing yourself, and doing flashcards, all of those things. And it sounds like a lot, but when you get to some particular subjects, some particular courses, you will need all of that. It's not necessarily every class. Some classes people don't need to study for. It just clicks, it makes sense, they love it, they get it, they have discussions in class and they're like, that's all I need, and they're fine. But some classes you need more. And so just be prepared to do all of those things. And also, as Lauren said, everything you're doing, whenever you're taking notes, whether it's from a video or a lecture or you're reading, don't ever take it down word for word. Don't ever try to copy everything off of your instructor's slides. Don't ever try to write or highlight everything in a textbook. Always take it, assimilate it, and figure out, what am I getting out of this? What did I just figure out here? What did I learn from this? And then write that. That is a whole different experience of note-taking that a lot of people do.
Okay, I'm gonna just do one final question here. What if you can't skip questions on a test or exam? What if you have to put an answer?
If you have to put an answer, you can't skip it, then that's when you want to guess. That's when you want to guess. So if it's an essay question, now guessing on an essay question, some people can do it. Some people can write things and it sounds really like they know something when they don't, but most of us can't get away with that. So if it's an essay question, I mean, you might be a little out of luck in coming up with a good answer when you can't skip it, and see what else is on the test that might jog your memory. But if it is a multiple choice exam and you cannot skip questions and you're really stuck, guess and move on.
Okay, awesome. We had some other questions in here. I don't think we'll get to all of them today, just in the interest of time, but we want to thank everyone for your participation today. We hope it was really helpful to you or to the learners that you work with, whether you're a teacher or a librarian or an educator. Again, recordings will come out tomorrow. You'll get an email as a follow-up along with the deck and a couple other resources. You can also email us if you have any questions we didn't quite get to, and we'll try to get you a response offline. But thanks again, Amy. Awesome job. And thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate it. Have a great weekend.